Joining us, MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai, staff writer at The Atlantic, and MS Now political contributor Mark Leibovich, and former State Department appointee under President Trump and MS Now political analyst Matthew Bartlett. Inzi, first tell me, what have you been experiencing in Dubai today?
Well, Katie, if you thought that diplomacy was the way out of this conflict, then think again, because well and truly today, the big question is whether the ceasefire still stands, because Iran feels perhaps like it doesn't, given their attacks across the UAE throughout the day today. Let me just go through exactly what has Iran done specifically towards the UAE. Firstly, there have been around 4 missile alerts on our phones today, the first since the 8th of April, so almost a month since that ceasefire began. And then across the UAE, many residents have heard the blaring of alarms on their phones as Iranian missiles and drones have been coming in to the country. The UAE said that 4 cruise missiles fired by Iran came towards UAE territory. 3 of them were intercepted. 1 of them landed into the sea. Then we saw a drone strike on the Fujairah Petroleum Industrial Zone. That caused an advanced fire, the authorities said there, and that injured 3 people. We've also heard a number of fighter jets flying above the UAE today, which is the first time we've heard them in quite some time, which just really gives us a signal that Iran has really upped the ante, has escalated once again today in this war. Now, what's been the UAE response to all of this, Katie? They've said that these are treacherous attacks. They emphasized in a statement that they will not tolerate any compromise in protecting its security and sovereignty under any circumstances, and that it reserves its full and legitimate right to respond to these attacks in a manner that ensures the protection of its sovereignty, national security, the safety of its territories, its citizens, residents, and visitors. And I just want to tell you about a conversation that I've had with a couple of sources within the Emirati government this evening. They've said to me that the UAE is preparing a severe retaliatory response against Iran following these recent attacks on the UAE vessels and this energy site in Fujairah. They also warned of a harsh revenge towards Iran. To me, from covering this conflict for the last couple of months now, Katie, that is some of the strongest rhetoric that I've heard from the UAE in response to what Iran has been doing towards the Gulf states following the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. I think we are now in a situation where the diplomacy, which was happening pretty heavily over the weekend, there were a lot of talks between the US and Iran via the Pakistanis. Remember, there were peace proposals being handed back and forth. That effectively has taken a huge sidestep now because we are back into military action of this conflict. I think importantly as well, this may well give a green light to the Israelis to restart their hostilities towards Iran. They will see as an attack on the UAE, as an attack on the Israelis and the US as well. They see them as a very strong ally, and I would not be surprised if, whether it's tonight or in the coming days, we see the Israelis now carrying out strikes once again inside Iran. Of course, they're already doing that inside of Lebanon, where there is supposed to be a ceasefire there as well. But this is an escalatory move by Iran today, throughout the day, whether it's the attacks on the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's the energy facility in Fujairah. This clearly is something that the UAE were not expecting and are now in a position where they may well retaliate.
So, Inzi, do we have any reliable reporting on what happened with the peace talks over the weekend? Why the Iranians suddenly started sending missiles over into the UAE? Why they started getting aggressive again in the Strait?
Well, I think this has come off the back of President Trump's plan to escort some of these vessels using US Navy vessels out of the Strait of Hormuz to some form of safety. I think also the fact that the US blockade very much remains in the Strait of Hormuz. And I think what Iran feel is that by the US carrying out the blockade and carrying out these escorts is a break of the ceasefire in itself. And so what they believe is that, well, if the US has broken the ceasefire in that sense, then we will target the UAE, but specifically targeting UAE vessels and then UAE territory is a big step by the Iranians, and it will not be taken lightly, not least by the UAE, but of course the US and Israel as well, specifically on the talks and why it seems to be a breakdown. Look, I think there's two sides to this. Yes, it was positive that these discussions were taking place and that Iran had put forward a 14-point proposal and that the US responded and Iran are reviewing that response. But those 14 points were pretty unrealistic. And I think the president would see them as totally unacceptable. And also, if Iran is not talking about its nuclear program within a framework to have negotiations, then the US will feel that there's no point, essentially, to have those discussions. So it was probably Iran going to the president, well, look, you need a deal more than we do. We're not going to capitulate to any of your demands. So the ball is in your court, and here's the price that you have to pay. Here's our deal that and our demands that you must follow in order to get to the negotiation table. So I think that's where we are. Iran probably wasn't entirely serious about actually having direct discussions once again. And a senior diplomat over the weekend inside Tehran was telling me all along that regional hostilities will likely flare up once again. Iran have been preparing for a US and Israeli attack inside of Tehran and other parts of the country as well. So I think all along we knew potentially that this conflict would reignite. I just don't think we expected that Iran to go on the offensive today and specifically target vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, but also target territory within the UAE once again.
Yeah, angering its neighbors, and we'll see how that's going to pan out. I'm going to get to the politics in a moment, but I want to spend another beat on the military action and what this means. Let's bring in four-star general and MS Now military analyst, retired four-star general, General Barry McCaffrey. General, always good to have you. Is the ceasefire still a ceasefire?
Well, it's right on the edge of breaking down, but since yesterday's order by President Trump, the U.S. Navy to conduct escort duty through the straits, I've been on edge. This is not a realistic plan. The U.S. Navy has enormous courage and tremendous technology and a layered defense. They can protect themselves pretty well, but there's 2,000 or more ships in and out of the Persian Gulf stuck. They're not going to be able to get 130 ships a day through the straits with an escort. And by the way, they're still slow-moving oil tankers, tremendous targets can be hit. But even the U.S. Navy is at great risk trying to pull off escort duty. They probably got less than 5 minutes of reaction time in the Gulf to a ballistic missile attack. There's still 20-some-odd mini submarines, perhaps, in the Gulf belonging to the Iranian Navy, which are very difficult to detect. They've got mine warfare options. They've got swarm tactics of UAVs as well as aircraft potentially and cruise missiles. So this is a high-risk operation, and it won't solve the political and economic problem of opening the Gulf.
Yeah, there's also a political messaging issue. I'm going to play a couple sound bites. The first one is the Treasury Secretary this morning, talking about how the U.S. has absolute control over the Strait.
The Iranians do not have control of the Strait. We have absolute control of the Strait. We have blockaded the ships going into or out of Iranian ports. Their economy is in free fall, and everyone says they have the high tolerance for pain. Well, their soldiers will not have a high tolerance for not getting paid.
Well, the Iranians are still fighting back. They're launching missiles. So a U.S. complete control over the Strait, I think there's an argument there on that. And then the other soundbite I want to play is Kevin Hassett asked about whether this is even a war.
You said the blockade is still on. A blockade is an act of war. Are we at war with Iran?
Iran shut down the straits.
Right.
And the only ones they were letting through were Iranian ships, and President Trump didn't think that was acceptable.
So we are still at war with Iran?
You know, I don't know what the definition of war is when we're not shooting and we're negotiating and they're under a lot of pressure. There's no reason, I think, right now to do anything other than what we're doing.
Matthew, do you think this administration is doing a good job of messaging on this war. They are appearing on broadcast. They're answering questions. Are those answers good?
I mean, Katie, the messaging has been more than mixed, more than messy. At times it's been contradictory. At times it's been even messianic. Are we at war with Iran? War is over or not? The Iranians have capitulated to our demands or not? The straits are open or not? Talks are on or not? This goes on and on and on. It's incoherent. It's not compelling. And as you just showed, the public is seeing through this. Last week, the president doesn't seem to be taking it well. So those that question if we are winning this war are treasonous. I think that's a preposterous notion. And then beyond that, we've heard from the president. You played Kevin Hassett, our Treasury Secretary. But the vice president, at a time of heightened national security, at a time of war, seems to be keeping a lower profile. Again, this administration, the messaging is all over the place, certainly as is maybe even the personnel in it.